I tried something way different than usual with this one. We read, I read some science fiction from the 1960s by Soviet writers. Um, this is called The Ultimate Threshold. It's a collection of the finest in Soviet science fiction, edited and translated by Mira Ginsburg. It is one of the most, probably the most obscure book that I have ever read. Um, And if you're here for a weird time of stories you probably have never heard of and may never find again, I got you covered. Uh, when I did a video about, I think 3 weeks ago now, I showed off a pretty big stack of anthologies that I had and kind of went through. And several of you guys mentioned that you would like to see this. So I read the whole thing. Um, I know it didn't look big. It's about 250 pages. So while I was tackling Lonesome Dove, I was tackling these short stories, and I was able to finally finish. And I took diligent notes on this one because I would have pretty much forgot everything uh, while reading another book and trying to fit a bunch of very obscure, like I said, Soviet science fiction in my head because it's just different from what I've read traditionally. Um, Here is the table of contents, just so you are able to follow along a little bit. Pause it. Hopefully, you can read that. Um, I never can tell because I shoot on my phone. But I know none of these authors. I'd never heard of any of these stories, and some were really good, some were fine, and some were not so good. So if you're here to just listen and not worry about spoilers, I'm going to just talk through each one of these stories. I'm going to try to be kind of quick, unless I really loved one, and I'll spend a little more time. But I may pick up my laptop, try to go through some of my notes because I have 14 pages of notes right here. Um, I took a lot of detailed, just like notes about what I was thinking in the moment and what I was trying to gather from the story. Because last thing I'll say until I jump in, but I don't know a whole lot about this time period. I briefly looked into it. There's quite a bit of like deconstruction of the Soviet Union and some of the like Stalin regime things that were happening before this, because this was published in 19. A lot of these stories are from 1960, but this is copyright 1970. Published in Penguin Books 1978. So this might be, yeah, I believe this is technically a 1978 printing by Penguin, but most of these stories span between 1963 through 1968. So this era of post-Stalin, kind of trying to will the Soviet Union and its people back into a time of like, uh, you know, healing, if you will. But again, I don't claim to be a history buff, so I don't really know much about this. But a lot of really unique, I think, historical implications on these stories and the like symbolism and allegory that's being done here. Because just like American science fiction writers or British science fiction writers, a story's only as good as kind of the um, underlying subtext. I think especially when it comes to short stories, because you can create something that's funny or you can create something that's beautiful, but if that's all it is, it just kind of sits on the page, you read it, and that's where it stays. But if it has a deeper theme or a deeper meaning, deeper historical context, it, I think, really lingers and sticks with you. So with that, I'll try to unpack some of these stories. So the ultimate threshold, here we go. The preface, Mira Ginsburg, like I said, is the one who edited and translated this. She kind of frames this just like I was saying, in the kind of time period that this was in, and that she chose all of these works based on their literary merit. And I was like hoping that that would ring true, and it did. I think that in the time period there was probably not a wealth of writers of science fiction in Soviet in the Soviet Union, and there wasn't probably there wasn't probably a lot of writers in general. It wasn't a practice that was being fostered as well as in other countries. So this is the best that we get from this time period, and I think some of the writers really shine. Um, the first story is called Icarus and Daedalus from 1968 by Henrik Altov. And please don't roast me too bad in the comments. I don't know how to pronounce these names, so I'm going to do my best. But this is a short one that essentially was just a retelling of the classic Icarus tale, flying too close to the sun. But instead, uh, our man who is Icarus flies into the sun, not close, but into the sun, because I believe his rocket, he thinks, is like they have enough protection, like a force field essentially around the rocket, that'll allow him to live. And like I said, just a retelling. Um, it was a fine beginning to it. I didn't think anything special of it, but the next story I thought was one of the best of the whole collection, and it was very short. It was 6 pages. It was called Erem, Erem, published in 1963 by Gleb, Anfilov. This is essentially a sentient little fix-it robot, who um, is tasked with repairing a chunk that's taken out of a wall where molten silicone is like spilling in, and a human being tasks this little robot with this. He says, "Go fix this," and the robot realizes midway through his kind of task fixing this that he is going to die. He's going to perish, be destroyed, whatever, uh, if he continues this. And he, I say he, I think of him as Wally. That's kind of how I pictured him. It's a sweet little robot who just says, "Hey, I'm gonna die if you don't basically tell me to stop." And the human being, very casually smoking a cigarette, just says, he's just like, "No, carry on. We can't. It's going to cause so much more damage if you stop." So he willingly tells the robot to continue, even though he's going to die. And I think that this analogy of just kind of like um, production and the greater good over the individual really rings true with like a lot of these stories, but this one in particular, because it's a robot, I think is very telling of the time period and the people that had in the previous generation who were extremely programmed to they were just seen as robots, just seen as numbers for the greater good. And again, I'm going to do my best to kind of like frame it historically if I know a little bit about it, but I am here to be educated if you know a lot more about this stuff historically than me. So if I'm off base, if my analysis is not correct of how it connects historically, please tell me. I'm trying my best. But Erem was a great story. Short, if you can find it, I would seek it out. Is really good writing, and it resonated well. The next story is called Formula of Immortality. It was published in 1963 by Anatoly Dneprov. I think this is the one. I'm going to scroll a little bit here. A man named Albert, is his father is a scientist, I believe, and he and his partner essentially discover like this. They study X and Y chromosomes, and they're doing tests in a lab, and they essentially stumble upon the formula for immortality, for making human beings immortal. And Albert's dad realizes kind of the horrors of what this will become, and it is ultimately Albert's downfall. By the end, Albert kind of sort of loses it, and I want to make sure I'm getting this one right. Um, yeah, so I'll read kind of just my notes on the very end here. I said, okay, wow, this one, while a little dull in few spots as far as hard science goes, was very ahead of its time, very self aware. You could kind of connect the dots, but also that's part of short story writing. It wasn't super difficult to kind of guess where it was going. Um, but it's really hard to deliver a twist you couldn't see coming with how short this medium is. So that part was a little lacking. Like the originality for the early 60s was very impressive. The author showed some really interesting plot, characters, and deep themes in relation to the future of science and implications of men learning too much and becoming inhuman with the growth of tech and scientific advancement. Um, so it's that kind of, it wasn't saying anything necessarily new in science fiction, but like it's a kind of trope that we've heard over and over again of like what's too far, what's too much in terms of scientific advancement. But I think given its time period and where it came from, I thought it was really impressive. Um, I think this is the same author who wrote Formula of Immortality, the previous story I just mentioned. Or no, he writes the next one. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. This is Formula for Immortality. Um, really great story. I really enjoyed just kind of like the awareness of it. It was very ahead of its time. And that leads me to the next story written by the same author. This one is not nearly as good. I thought the worst one in the collection. It's called When Questions Are Asked, published in 1963, again by Anatoly Dneprov. This one, I'll sum it up quick. It's a bunch of like Russian scholars and people of literature who are alumnus of this organization or college in Russia, and they go back and they essentially just like relive their glory days and talk about old times, and that just is sort of a avenue and vehicle for talking about like hard science and a couple of, I mean, I will say like about this entire collection, um, this story illustrates it. I think the the worst, I guess, but it a lot of the stories centered around like scientific advancement, and I get that from the time period again being around kind of the missile crisis, the space race, the like the extreme, hyper advancement of science that was starting to take place at that time, where you were really getting these big ideas and actually bringing them to life. And so, um, I think the fascination of people who are scientists who are studying the scientific method and who are conducting tests. That happens a lot in these stories. That's kind of the backdrop for a lot of these stories. This one in particular, I just thought was the execution was poor. Very boring, like way of discussing this because we're just hearing like people reminisce. It's really that's all this was. Um, Maybe I missed something, but when questions are asked was the worst story in this collection. I thought couldn't wait for it to be over. The next one is called The Horn of Plenty. This is by Vladimir Grigoriev, 1964. This is a kind of a Bradbury-esque story, I thought, in the kind of idea that it had. But a man discovers how to create a machine that essentially is a funnel where you can throw useless junk in one end and it will spit out like useful stuff on the other end. And um, he essentially like discovers this very useful thing for society, and then this like I can't remember if he's like a policeman or if he's a fellow scientist, but he wants him to like show it in front of everybody and do it in reverse. And a real tragic event happens where both of them end up getting sucked into the machine because this guy who wants him to showcase this horn of plenty um, is just a jerk and ultimately is the downfall of it. And so it helps the society, but the man who creates it passes with it because I think it was trying to kind of convey that like doing good just for the sake of doing good, but um, not selling it, not do like I don't know. It again reached back to those I think difficult times in the Soviet Union where it was all for like everybody doing the good for everybody else. Like it wasn't individualistic at all. Um, I didn't really I didn't convey that very well, but the Horn of Plenty was a really good story. I enjoyed this one. I thought it was um, it's kind of a shocking ending. And like I said, kind of not the prose. Bradbury has much better prose, but um, the idea behind like a machine that can do this, I thought just kind of reminded me of a story I read in Dandelion Wine by Bradbury. Next, we have the second longest story in this collection called The Useless Planet. Uh, this was published in 1967 by Olga Larionova. Yeah. This one follows a couple of kind of nameless, um, like half robot, half human people who are essentially these things called surveyors. They are tasked with going down on this planet and like gathering information. And the head of the surveyors is this old captain who is kind of jaded at this point, is sees this planet as being very useless, and it's called the Useless Planet. And the main character is this woman named 27th. The two kind of main characters, other than the captain, are numbers. Their names are numbers. So 27th, and then I think 93 or something. Let me see if I can find it. Where are we at? Horn of Plenty, Useless Planet. 140th is the other one. So forgive me for it'd be hard to describe the characters' names and make it clear because it's a number. But um, they're collecting information, and 140th is like a dog creature, and then 27th is like she's a young woman who they're supposed to go down and essentially blend in with these people and gather information, but the people keep realizing who she is. And this one, this one was kind of an on the nose allegory for, again, the Soviet Union and um, its tenets and its the things that it believes in, or believed in, I guess. But it felt very on the nose of like the people down on this planet. They utilize art. They're encouraging of being individual and exploring and things. And the collectors see that as like this. No, we don't want anything to do with that. Like it's kind of on the nose, like I said. It drags because it is like 42 pages long, pretty long for a short story, and the payoff just wasn't really there. I didn't hate it, but I didn't really. I didn't come away with this one being like that's a new idea. Um, I thought there was a couple of unique things about it that were kind of fun, but overall, this one, I think for its length, just didn't really deliver. Um, that was The Useless Planet. What do we got next? Oh, maybe the best story. This one or Erem, like I said earlier. This one is the title of the collection, and it for sure lives up to its name, being the title of the anthology. The Ultimate Threshold, uh, published in 1965 by Herman Maximov. This story is wildly similar to PKD. I don't know if this person, Herman Maximov, read PKD or had any, like, even in the prose, it feels like that weird psychedelic human sort of like having a conversation with a robot and sort of questioning the robot and sentience and like what does it mean to be alive, what does it mean to develop a machine that um, tests people before they want to commit suicide. Like it's a really, really sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on YouTube. I know it's a hot button word sometimes, but yeah, it's a really like very unique story. I would really highly recommend you find that story, this story specifically, the Ultimate Threshold. It's let me see if I can find my notes for this one too. I was blown away by this. Um, the way it even frames it, we begin with this quote. I'm gonna go to that page just real quick because I think it's worth at least looking at real quick. We begin with like a quote of almost like from a historical document or something that like sets up that like frames this story. So like it already I don't know how to describe it, but it does something that no other story in this collection does by doing that, and it immediately brings us into this moment where this man named Velt, who's actually the creator of this machine, this building called the House of Death, goes to the House of Death, seemingly to end his life. And he has a conversation with a computer called the processor. Let me see really quick. Confessor, the confessor machine. Um, there's this kind of religious discussion here of the holy fire of the great Chimpo. Um, he's asked who he is over and over again. Um, he has these flashbacks to like his mother. He takes a narcotic at one point. Like it's so PKD-esque, but it's so unique and so weird. Um, and essentially, like Velt tells the machine he's created it. The machine's like, hold on, this is you. Like you created me to like have people confess in front of me, and it's just such a it's my favorite story because I love PKD and I love Philip K. Dick's way of like asking the deeper questions in the meaning of the universe and things like that. Where through such a bizarre, almost acid trip of a story, you're really getting a lot of unique perspective through it. So, um, yeah, my notes literally said, "Wow" in all caps. What a beautiful and sad story. Really takes a deep dive into morality and asks some hard hitting questions. This one felt a lot like PKD, far and away the best one of the collection so far. So I liked this one more than Erem at the time of reading. But that and the Little Robot story are my two favorites, I think, looking back. Um, Next one is called Invasion by Roman Podolny. Podolny, uh, published in 1966. This one is, I think, the shortest of the collection. It is really funny. And I know some people in this space don't love humor in science fiction, but I thought for a three or four page story, really, really, really short, and it's like I won't even spoil it. It's just it's a funny story that really doesn't have any sort of takeaway. It's just it's a quirky, um, paradoxical coincidence or of some sort. So it's you get done with it, and if you understand kind of what just happened, it just made me chuckle, and I moved on. So a fun little short story. When You Return by Igor Rosokhovatsky, published in 1967. Forgive me. Um, this one, I want to say, is the one that reminded me of Interstellar, where a human named, let's see if I can find it. When You Return. Nope. I'm thinking of a different one. Yep, that's a different one. When You Return is oh yeah, this one is the one that had the most potential and just didn't deliver, in my opinion. Um, the one that could have been the best. There's a woman named Vita and a man who approaches her named Valerie. Um, that Valerie. He's a man, so whatever. Um, anyway, Valerie meets Vita and wants to take her to, is it Prague? Yes, they're going to Prague on holiday, and he this woman's kind of young, so he goes to meet her family, and the mom, Vita's mom, kind of thinks she recognizes this guy, and he's this like superhuman, basically. This is in a kind of a far future where he's kind of a superhuman, Superman type, whatever, and it, this one kind of confused me, but it he takes her to like a toy factory in Prague, and I just I let me look at my notes really briefly. It just really didn't connect, in my opinion. He flies her literally. He has like jetpacks on him. Flies her to Prague. Um, they watch these dolls perform called the Apostles. Um, she goes into this famous toy factory. He says he'll come back to get her. Vita talks to a toy designer, and Valerie, who is this thing called a synhom, synum, Synhom, synum, is that's the name of like the superhumans, but ultimately turns out to be, I keep saying ultimately because of the title of the collection, turns out to be Vita's like dad, who was transformed into a synum. There was this event called um, the experiment, uh, and he becomes a new creation. He tells her about the experiment. He leaves his daughter, his wife's like his grandmother or her grandmother, um, and it's essentially like accepting him for who he is now, even though he's changed. So there's kind of like a beauty at the end of it that it gives me some reason for like uh, having an emotional tie to these characters, but the like plot, what they do is so beyond like uh, there's no reason for them to be doing any of this. None of that's explained, so it's just kind of it just leaves you kind of floundering. Um, Again, like the ending where you find out that he's the dad, but he like kind of reckons with him within himself about like, is he still truly her dad, or is he a completely new creation? Like, there's some depth there, but like none of the rest of the story really made me care about any of them until the end. So I feel like I said this had a ton of potential. It just didn't deliver. Okay, what do we got? That was When You Return. This one's called One Less, by Igor Rosokhovatsky, same author, in 1966. One Less. I think I liked this one. Yeah, this one rocked. Um, Probably my third favorite story. Pretty short. A research assistant who's like almost 50, and is still a research assistant, named Victor, is just kind of stuck in his mind, walking out of his research building, the place where he does his work, um, and is he's stuck in a loop of thinking about um, his project that he's researching, and um, he's just paying attention to it, not paying attention to what's happening around him. And we get these little interstitial little cuts of a truck driver who is driving somewhere, and you can see it coming from a mile away. This is the reason I like it. Starts with the truck driver. We cut to Victor having this internal monologue and dialogue with himself. Then we cut back to the truck driver very briefly, and then so you're like, if you know, what do you think's going to happen? And what happens? He gets hit by the truck, as you would imagine, the way the story's being told. But then we we realize this it's kind of on the nose again, but we realize at the end of the story, there's a man who's standing there, and some of the people who see this event happen, where he gets hit by the truck, are very sad, lamenting this. And this man kind of says, like, millions of people die every day. And what we find out about this man is he's dealing with an incurable disease. But the research project that Victor was working on would have cured him had he not been hit by the car. So this man, who is essentially not giving any time of day to this man who just got hit by a car, simply because people die, and that's a natural way, happens to everybody. Why do we care? He could have This man is dying and will die, but could have been saved by the very man who got hit by the truck. Like, great way to like um, just sideswipe you with you like subvert some expectation. This one really subverted expectations, because you could see the truck hitting him from a mile away, but you did not see that like the research project that he was working on would end up saving people, especially one person who was standing there watching it. Great twist at the end. I loved this story. I thought it was wonderfully written. It was really short. It was like 5 pages or 6 pages, but one less. Really good. We're getting down to the end. 3 more stories to go. Thanks for staying with me. Um, if you're still listening to all of this, you got to be really interested in some wacky, weird stuff, because um, I I did this simply because I thought it would be an interesting experience, and it was. But this, I think, is kind of a hard book to get a hold of. So if you don't have a copy, but this is really interesting to you, and you're still here, get it because it's worth the read. It's a really enjoyable collection. Um, and yeah, let's talk about the last three stories. We played under your window, uh, by Vladimir Shcherbakov from 1966. This one is the one that reminded me of Interstellar. We have a father who kind of is a career deep space traveler, and he goes off and kind of leaves his family behind to do his space travel. He comes back years later. His wife no longer there. His daughter, his son. He doesn't know his son. Has just kind of left his family for his job, and he recognizes some children who used to play under his window. Everybody would scold these children and say, "Don't play under the window," but our main character, who is now an older man, always encouraged the kids to play. And he recognizes this girl who is now really old, or not really old, much older, no longer a child. And she and her husband have kids in the neighborhood of his old house that he returns to. And he kind of reminisces, and it's a really beautifully told, soft, very soft story with some fun sci-fi elements. But um, we essentially find out that his rocket is missing, that he returned to Earth on. He goes to investigate where this rocket came from and how he got there, and we have a like this is Interstellar. He got back to Earth without a rocket, and we find out that his son, who I'm pretty sure was married to the little like the person he recognized, this girl he recognizes who used to play under his window. Um, that's his son, and his son became just like him, driving deep space like rockets, just like his dad. But he never knew his dad. But he was the one who helped him get home. Essentially, the physics and the science of it don't really add up to me, at least in my reading of it. But it's neither would Interstellar if you tried to read that. I don't think. So essentially, we have like what is the end of Interstellar, where he somehow makes it home, gets to see his child again, and we don't see that happen, but you infer that he meets his son, and it's a kind of a beautiful story. Um, that was a fun, like I said, very soft science fiction story, short story that had a lot to just had a lot to say emotionally. Not a ton to say about any scientific things like a lot of these did. And that's why I will say before I finish the last two, I do think Ginsburg did a pretty freaking good job of like assembling science fiction from this era based on its literary merit, because a lot of these stories do have something to say, whether it's something emotional to say, something about the greater society that these authors grew up in and lived in, or scientifically it's trying to explore kind of some kind of concept. um, mostly you know mostly average grades for a lot of these stories, but some really did stand out in their own ways. um, Second to last story is called Preliminary Research by Ilya Varshavsky from 1965. This one, I'm going to forget. So let me go back really quick to my notes, trusty notes. This one reminded me a little bit of like Severance. Never watched the show, but I kind of know the concept. This man named Rong, Rong, he leaves his old job to go to a new job where he's his task is to think of ideas, and a supercomputer will take the idea, and if it likes the idea, you're good. You're good job. You did your job. If it doesn't like your idea, you get fired eventually. And but nobody really knows where these ideas are going, and it's ultimately to feed this computer and make it smarter, and you know um, the workers themselves coming up with ideas. That's literally all that they're coming up with. um, they don't really know what it's for, but yet they're making good money, and it's like a, it's one of the, it feels kind of like what we're experiencing right now with AI, where we're just throwing stuff at the wall. A lot of money in that, in that space. People are just not really sure where it's going to go, but what the heck? And we find out at the end a fun little twist that the previous job he left, the guy who told him to go work for this company, is like one of the stakeholders in this new company. So a little double agent action, or just kind of, um, I don't know. It was a fun little twist to find that out, because he clearly has ulterior motives. But is a fine story. Preliminary research is fine. Had a fun little concept and a fun little twist. It was fine. The last one was the longest story in the collection, called "He Who Leaves No Trace." This one, this was written by Mikhail Yemtsev and Yeremey Parnov, 1963. This was uh, very weird and didn't need to be like 45 pages long, but it was okay. Um, these two cosmonauts go visit their old friend George, who is basically on a planet called Green Pass. He's alone. He's developed some technology where he has like this little octopus robot that helps him, and he creates like almost like a, I think it's like a TV, essentially a TV rendering of like another human being, but like it creates a 3D. He clones himself. Let's just say that he essentially clones himself, but goes through the process of like trying to discover how to like control the clone and whatnot. And Bad George, we'll call him Bad George. Um, I'm not I'm not really sure why he chose to tell the story this way, but it was fine. We open, and Bad George essentially inflates to be this giant creature who's there's a billion copies of him who get sucked into the big one, and and then he dies. But halfway through the story, then we go back and we learn all of this on how it happened. So we hear it straight from George, who I guess was trapped this whole time by his bad clone. And um, we just have like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Is that what it is? Mr. Yeah, that's right. But like a scientist who created something that got out of hand and essentially tried to kill him. And it's just speaking to the age old like cautionary tale of like, when robots get too smart, when our creations supersede us, they will try to eliminate us. It was fine. Again, kind of around that time, probably pretty groundbreaking stuff, pretty unique idea, but I wasn't super impressed with it, and it dragged because it was almost 50 pages. But um, I don't know. This video is probably kind of dragging as well now that I've gotten this far and I've told you all the stories in here. But I hope this was fun for the few of you that decided to stick around this whole time and to listen to me blab about some extremely obscure short stories. But like I said, if you find a copy of this, or can find a copy of this, I think last I checked, it's like $30 on eBay, maybe 20. Um, it's a fun little read that I think it is much different than anything I've ever read. I'm sure I'll probably never encounter a lot of these authors ever again. I might in some of the other anthologies, but I've never seen any of these names, and it was just a really unique experience. I'm glad I did it. So those of you that voted the ultimate threshold when I put out my last video, thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. Um, it had its ups and downs, but it was ultimately a really valuable experience. And I'm glad I read it. Additionally, I just finished Lonesome Dove yesterday. I think it was. Yep, it was yesterday. It's kind of blurring now. I finished Lonesome Dove. I finished this. I'm on to my next project, which I think is going to be this guy. which I actually read last year and didn't make a video on it because I didn't know what I was reading. I finished it and thought, what the heck? I'm going to need to go back to that one. Thought about making a video, but ultimately just decided that I would reread it. So I'm rereading it, and I may just go down the rabbit hole of all four. I think there might be a fifth, but all of the Book of the New Sun, because I can't keep myself from it. I also think I told you guys that I was going to start Count Zero. I did. Don't know why I started it. I got 2 chapters in and abandoned it for the rest of Lonesome Dove and this. But I'm just I was juggling a lot of books and things that I wanted to do at the time. Now that I finished Lonesome Dove and I finished Ultimate Threshold, I'm going to focus back in on some sci-fi, maybe some fantasy here soon. But I think Book of the New Sun is my project right now. And I don't want to treat it as such, but I really want to figure out and explore it, because the first reading made me confused as all get out in a good way because I really enjoyed it. But I was like, what is this? And I'm sure, as most people have said, that it makes sense later on. But anyway, I digress. If you're interested in that, stay tuned on the channel. I'll probably be discussing that in future videos. Yeah, like I said, thank you guys so much for watching, for engaging with this content. This is a really random video to make, but I had fun making it, had fun reading it. So, yeah, hope to see you guys in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and yeah, thank you.